You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel. Oh, we can't hear you. So, yeah, I don't know, your mic. We were having some technical issues. Looks like I spoke too soon. All right, well, see if you can, I don't know, fix those. And I guess I'll just go on my own for a second here. Okay, so Mace Windu. It looks like that Mace Windu may be returning to Star Wars. Now, of course, it's really hard to say whether or not all this stuff is true. So, you know, what I'm about to tell you guys, what hopefully when Daryl's able to jump back on, what we're able to talk about tonight, this is somewhat speculation, but it's not complete rumor because this was actually brought on by something that's been going around the news lately, that Samuel L. Jackson himself has actually been making the rounds, talking about to Lucasfilm and to pretty much anybody who will listen, hey, I want to return as Mace Windu, even if I have to return one-handed or something, which was really kind of strange to me because if you actually remember from the last time, correct me if I'm wrong, and Ronaldo's joining us, by the way, if I'm correct about this, I think Mace actually had both of his hands chopped off at the end of Revenge of the Sith. I have a distinct memory that both his hands were lopped off. So this whole thing that he's talking about in this article, which of course I'll get into in a second, but where he's talking about like, hey, you know, I'll come back, you know, one-handed. I'll learn to use my lightsaber with my other hand or something. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, yeah, man, you know, you actually kind of had both hands lopped off. So I don't think that's happening. But of course, as we've seen with Luke Skywalker, as we've seen with a lot of other stuff, or a lot of other examples, I should say, you know, it's possible, right? You can get one of those, like 2-1B, when he basically put the mechanical hand on Luke. It's, you know, it is what it is. You guys will have to forgive me if I'm a little bit flustered because wasn't really planning on doing this on my own. So I see that Daryl could be back. He's still kind of looking. I know I'm trying not to give you guys a play-by-play. You have to forgive us. We're having some technical issues tonight. Usually it doesn't happen. If anything happens, we usually work these things out. But hey, that's a live stream. That's what happens when you do the live streams. Ronaldo says he had one hand cut off, the other one, the one with the lightsaber. Really? I really actually, man, I'll have to go watch that again because I really thought it was both hands. I thought he had both hands cut off. It looked to me like he had both hands cut off. But, I mean, I have to say that in this article, which again, we'll be discussing and everything once we work out these issues, it's basically, well, you know what? I'm just going to get into it because I'm not really entirely sure when these issues are going to be worked out. I know he's working on trying to get his sound going, so all right, hold on. Let's see if we got him. You there? Nah. Got nothing, man. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's, hey, there's nothing like working out tech issues live on the show, right? This is why we usually try to get on a little bit early to work on these, but, you know, things just aligned where that didn't really happen. So, I mean, why not, right? Let's make this part of the entertainment. See if you can figure out, you know, if your right microphone is selected or whatever. You know, because I mean, on my end, everything's seems to be working out okay. So, all right, Daryl signed off. He's going to try to sign back on. But you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and talk about this because I don't really want you guys to sit here and pretty much watch 10 minutes of us working out on tech issues. That's not why you tuned in. So here's what happened. Basically, Samuel L. Jackson has been, for some reason, I don't know if he approached Lucasfilm directly. I don't know if he just started saying this stuff in the press or whatever, but I don't know. Somehow, he started talking about how he has this really strong desire to start doing Star Wars again. Now, it should be noted that Sam Jackson has been really open to going back to the Star Wars franchise for a number of years. It's no secret that he's wanted to do it. And in fact, if you guys remember, his involvement in Star Wars to begin with was because he was lobbying pretty hard to be part of the prequel trilogy. He actually approached George Lucas and said, look, I don't care if I'm a stormtrooper. You know, just put me in the thing. And of course, George was like, well, you know, I mean, if we actually have you in a Star Wars movie, we're not going to just make you a stormtrooper. Now, of course, a fun fact is that later on, the same thing basically happened with Daniel Craig for episode 7, right? He basically did a cameo as a stormtrooper. So it's really interesting how you get a lot of these actors who at various points in their career lobby to be in a Star Wars film because it's such a cultural phenomenon. So because of that, you can understand to a degree why people would actually want to do that. I mean, let's face it. If any of us had the opportunity to be in a Star Wars film, we would jump at it. Or even, you know, any of these Disney Plus series. So it's understandable that being the pop culture phenomenon that Star Wars is, people would just be lining up to be a part of this. But what's interesting is usually a lot of these actors, you know, either they're afraid of getting typecast or maybe they want to do other things or whatever. Like in the case of Harrison Ford, he's a perfect example. Now, he was never really super into Star Wars anyway, but pretty much he wanted to be killed off. And yeah, he's been agreeing to return to the Star Wars franchise, surprisingly, when they have, you know, actually wanted him for something, like for The Rise of Skywalker, for instance. But what's really interesting to me is that on the flip side of that, you have an actor like Sam Jackson who actually, even though his character met a pretty definitive ending, even though on this show, both Daryl and I have argued that you could make the case that Mace survived. And, you know, hopefully Daryl's able to join us pretty soon because that was really one of the things that I wanted to discuss with him and then, of course, with you guys. But obviously, if he's not able to come back on, then I'm going to have to discuss it with you guys. So get ready to chat, people. I'm going to need you tonight. So pretty much, you have Sam Jackson, who seemingly really wants to return to the Star Wars universe. So badly, in fact, that he's pretty much talking to anybody who will listen to him, saying, hey, you know, I really want to be in this thing. You know, I'll learn to use my lightsaber with the other hand. Can you find a spot? And of course, Bryce Dallas Howard, who has directed some episodes of The Mandalorian, an episode or two of the Book of Boba Fett. Actually, I think it was just one. I think it was just episode 5. But the point is that she's just, you know, she just basically responded with like all eyeballs or something. And a lot of people are speculating. They're kind of like, well, you know, what does that mean? Now, Ronaldo brings up a good point. He says, I don't like this idea. There's some characters that just have to stay dead. And that's pretty much what I was going to say would be launching our discussion tonight, is that do you think, in fact, that characters who meet somewhat of an end, because like I said, Daryl and I have pointed out on several occasions that you could make a strong case for Mace Windu's return. The other thing that I would point out, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, is, and this is another thing that Daryl and I have pointed out on several of our shows, if you could bring back Darth Maul you can bring back anybody. I think that that's probably the strongest case of all. Here you have a man who was chopped in half and fell down a shaft. And not only did he do this, but he was able to survive long enough in order to have his body taken and have the spider legs or whatever put on him. And then eventually you get these mechanical legs. So, I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's reaching. Some people criticize the return of Palpatine, but here's the thing. With Palpatine, at least you can hang on to the fact that, okay, he was practicing this like Sith alchemy and sorcery and all this stuff. He was obsessed with bringing, like resurrection and all this other stuff, right? And then, of course, they had to throw the line in The Rise of Skywalker, the dark side of the Force contains... Oh, wait, here we go. Daryl's back. Nope. I know. It's kind of a mystery. You'd think it was a real simple process. I mean, you plug a mic in. Did you just try unplugging the mic from the USB and plugging it back in and see if it reads it? You did that? All right. I'm sure you rebooted the computer a few times, right? Yeah, did that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could see that the mic's lit up. It's lit up. Did you go into the settings and make sure it's like, yes, welcome to Geek Squad, a computer repair podcast. This is fantastic. All right, Daryl's gonna make another attempt. But, so... Palpatine was practicing a lot of the Sith magic and everything else, and the dark side, I keep screwing that line up. Dark side of the Force contains something that some consider to be unnatural. You'd think I would have committed this to memory by now. But, the point with Palpatine, though, is at least you can hang on to the fact that, hey, he has... And if you remember, when he was thrown over the edge by Vader, and he seemingly disappeared, and you saw that blue flash, you can go, okay, his Sith spirit kind of, his body evaporated, but his spirit went on, and it probably inhabited something else. You could actually make the argument for him coming back. But with some of these other guys, I don't know, not so much. So Ronaldo says, could he come back? Yeah, if you could bring Palpatine back, you can bring anybody back. And it's funny because... Ronaldo, you're actually making the opposite point of me. You're almost saying that they can bring Palpatine back, they can bring anybody back. But I really consider Maul to be the more fantastic resurrection, if you will. Because at least Palpatine was a dark side Force user. And at least he was already conjuring up all this Sith magic and stuff like that. So because of that, you could at least go, okay, yeah, it's still kind of a stretch. But it's not as much of a stretch as a mortal being that gets cut in half, falls down a shaft, and who knows for how long he was down there before somebody, brought him back. I mean, so again, I point to Maul as like the Jason Voorhees of Star Wars because this guy seems to survive everything. And then at some point he gets just normal mechanical legs, I guess. But it's just, I don't know. And Voyager joins us too, by the way. We're going to get to some of his chats soon too. Ronaldo says, I love old characters as much as any other Star Wars fan. But, very important but, capitalized it, so I'm going to emphasize it for you. We need to move on. Let's create new and interesting characters and let the past die. I guess. Yeah. I totally agree, actually. Voyager jumps in and says, I agree. Let's let deceased characters remain deceased. Palpatine clones in a big jar? Like, why? Yeah, I think I would have to agree with that, too, because one of the problems, well, let me backtrack this a little bit. So, first of all, to Ronaldo's point, I think that it's true. I think that that while it's nice to see some of these old characters and everything, to shoehorn them into a story doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's almost like, because someone was really popular, let's put him in this story. Now, I'm going to give you guys full disclosure. I mean, on one hand, I have to admit, I would love to see Mace Windu back. And the reason why I would love to see him back is for the same reason why I would love to see, why I wanted to see Maul back. Now, we got Maul. But one of the reasons is, especially where Maul was concerned, was he was this really cool character that we saw in one film, and then that was it. Now, to bring him, the way they brought him back was a little crazy, but I do have to admit, the fact that he helped defeat a lot of the Mandalorians and he kind of ruled Mandalore for a little bit, for like 10 minutes, the fact that he became the head of Crimson Dawn, they did some really cool things with his character that I think that over time we've been able to overlook a lot of the, shall we say, questionable natures of his survival. However, they also wrapped up his story fairly neatly, and then that was it. With Mace, I do think that it's the same kind of a deal. I think that they haven't really fully utilized his character. However, I think that they don't necessarily have to shoehorn him into any of the current storylines. Because if you think about it, and this is going to be a question I was going to pose to you guys anyway, let's say they do bring back Mace. Where do you think he would fit? Which series would you put him in? Which, I don't know, like if they were going to make a movie where they brought him back, where do you think that he would fit in that? Start letting me know that in the chats, because I'd really be curious. I mean, again, I get it. You guys, at least Ronaldo and Voyager, don't really want to see him return. They want, let's move past the old characters and start developing fresh ones. And I totally agree with that. I think that at some point, you have to let go of the past. You have to start developing newer characters. And this happened a lot in the old expanded universe, where even though they had the familiar characters there, as some of the books went on, they took more of a back seat, and you had a lot of really other cool characters. And what's funny about that is yesterday's new characters have become today's, beloved characters, right? I mean, let's look at Mara Jade from the expanded universe. Mara Jade was this brand new character, and everybody's kind of like, oh, it's kind of weird. But now she's been around for a long time. She's almost as beloved as Luke, Han, and Leia. Ahsoka's another great example of this. Everybody, including me, really wasn't all that nuts about Ahsoka when we first saw her in the Clone Wars in the beginning. But now she's this totally beloved character, and now we're all like, ooh, finally a live-action Ahsoka. So Ahsoka is every bit as established in our minds, along with Thrawn, along with some of these other characters, as anybody else. And so that's proof that you can move on. In fact, now I've only read book 1, but the Thrawn, let me get this right, the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, because I read Chaos Rising. There's been a couple other books in the trilogy released. But basically, it completely takes place in the whole unknown regions, deals with the Chiss, and deals with a lot of things, a lot of political intrigue between Thrawn and some of the other officers, as well as just some of the threats, like the Nile, I think, were one of them. And then, the Krisk, I think. I don't know. I got to get better at these things. But the point is that there's no familiar characters in there. I think in Chaos Rising, they do actually have a flashback when Thrawn had met Anakin and Padme briefly. but that was it. I mean, it was literally a quick scene. It was a little bit of a blip. It really didn't. It wasn't like they were relying on a familiar character. But the thing that's really funny about it is that, here you have, again, new characters taking place in a newer, untapped, unexplored region, and it's fine. You don't really need to have the familiar characters to make really good Star Wars stories. Let me get back to the chats a little bit here. Ronaldo says, I love to see Obi-Wan, Luke, Boba, and the others, but I want to see new faces. So let me take that in a two-part answer here, at least from my perspective. So I think it's great that they're expanding the stories of the familiar characters that we have. And this is what I don't care, and this is where I draw the line. If you make let's just take the Obi-Wan series. You're making a show that is set in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. You are focusing on a particular storyline in that. Obi-Wan. What was Obi-Wan doing between the time that he basically had to take refuge on Tatooine and then, watch over Luke and then eventually when he gets Luke ready in A New Hope to join him to go to Alderaan, or at least they didn't know it was blown up yet, but in other words, to get him engaged in this whole thing. And one of the cool things about the Obi-Wan series, I think, and if you guys missed it, we did react to the trailer on Monday. In fact, we showed the trailer twice. We showed it at the beginning of the show, and then we showed it again toward the end. And we did a whole show on the whole reaction. So if you guys missed that, not now, because right now you're not only hitting that like button and that subscribe button if you haven't yet already, but you're also just kind of watching and participating in this show, which I appreciate. So when this is done, or, maybe this weekend, definitely go back and check that out. But with the Obi-Wan series, I think what's happening is that they're trying to show you how this character went from basically a broken, disappointed, defeated, character to a more whimsical, wizened, sage-like guy, right, in episode 4. Because if you think of the way he was toward the end of episode 3 and the way he is in episode 4, it's a little bit different. And you do need a little bit that bridge to connect it to. So that makes sense. And of course, if you're going to put a bunch of familiar characters in there, that makes sense. Of course, they're also introducing new characters, which also makes sense. See, that I don't have a problem with. But in the case of Mace, I think it's a little bit different. All right, so.
Check 1, 2.
Yes, we have you. You are back. All right.
All right.
Even though I've been on a roll here. But, and you can just jump in whenever. I'm just dealing with some of the chats. But, so when you have a situation like the whole Obi-Wan thing, something like that, the new characters make sense. Now, in terms of Mace, though, I could see where some would think that it's basically shoehorning a character in where it's not really necessary. So, before I go back to a lot of these chats, because there's been a number of them, Ronaldo and Voyager are chatting in like crazy tonight, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Voyager says, "Yay, Daryl and Eric back together." Yeah, isn't that great? Great for me, I'll tell you, because I wasn't prepared to do this by myself. So, I was really kind of like, yeah, let's get it. But what do you think about this whole idea of Mace possibly returning? Because I know that you and I have talked about it before, like, well, we would kind of like to see that actually from a certain point of view. But on the other hand, you and I had also expressed concerns that it would have to be done correctly, and there's a big danger that you could just be shoehorning the character in, and it's kind of like, as cool as he served his point in the story, it might be best to let him die. What do you think?
Yeah, I really would love to see him because I love the character of Mace, and I think his story was kind of left unfinished in a way.
Mm-hmm.
The only way I could see it coming back is maybe if, um, now in current situations, I mean, it may be kind of difficult, excuse me, to bring him back because I mean, really, because if you bring him back, you have to kill him right back off again, pretty. Because let's face it, he's like the second most powerful person on the council. If you bring him back, let's just say in some sort of post Jedi situation, like of course, once again, you kind of had those same questions like Ahsoka. Well, where the heck were you doing? Like, when Luke was running around, you got all these powerful Jedi like Ahsoka and Mace. It just kind of makes things seem a little like weird that you have all these powerful Force users not helping do what he needs to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I
So,
totally know what you mean. And I mean, I thought of that too because, post Return of the Jedi, you have Luke, you have Ahsoka now.
mhm.
If you put Mace, depending on where you put him though. Maybe you don't put him there. Maybe you put him more during the time of Andor or, Obi-Wan or something. But I mean, I get it though, right? Because now he's second only to Yoda. Because remember, you still have Yoda around through this whole thing. So it seems to
So
me like if you find
yeah.
out that you got Yoda, Mace, Ahsoka, it'd be like the problem is they'd have to keep it at post Return of the Jedi because if you start to try to do this between 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, you then would have to be like, okay, if you've got Mace, if you've got Yoda, if you've got Ahsoka,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like, maybe we don't need Luke or Leia. Maybe we just all being powerful, maybe we just go and defeat the
Exactly.
Empire.
Well, yeah, and and the other thing that is that one, it's kind of like, all right, the only way you could probably even remotely probably start to answer it is like you do the whole Luke uh Last Jedi version of Mace Windu and make him, because he lost to a student of his, he feels disenfranchised and he sees how the empire has taken over. He feels like, okay, it's way beyond what I can do. I'm done, you know. But then that wouldn't be like I said. Now Samuel L. Jackson probably wouldn't be as happy because it's like he wouldn't be the character that he probably wanted to play. If you do post Return of the Jedi, once again, it still kind of shows like, all right, where the heck were you doing the events of the original trilogy? So I think now the only way I can see this happening, and you may have to de-age him, is that, and he doesn't look that much different, honestly. So I mean, it's
Mm-mm.
really not that bad.
Nope.
So you could put him in like not High Republic, but into the High Republic era. Like when they start doing those movies, like they've been rumoring, if you put him in a series or a show like that, where like, okay, you kind of start to show the more pre-Phantom Menace era,
Yeah.
you could stick him in there, and then now kind of like how he got on the council, then you can do that, and then it'll make perfect sense. You have plenty of stories you could tell with him, and it wouldn't disturb um any of the legacy stuff that we already have, such as the original trilogy and so forth.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that was going to be my other suggestion too, is that maybe they just put it, before that. Let's see. Let's get some more of these chats going. Ronaldo says, at some point it reminds me of comic books. I love my comic books, but I know that if a big character dies, it'll come back at some point, which means death is not that meaningful. And that's another good point too, is the fact that,
Mm,
Star Wars, one of the things that made it so impactful, both in the prequels and the original trilogy, was that these deaths had real meaning. When Obi-Wan died, it was jarring.
mhm.
And even though technically, yeah, he kind of came back as a Force ghost or something like that, so you still had him in the other two movies, for some reason that never really lessened the impact of his death. Same thing when Vader died at the end of Return of the Jedi. When Palpatine at least temporarily died at the end of Return of the Jedi as well. When Qui-Gon died at the end of Phantom Menace. I mean, at that point, you had meaning and emotional weight and impact to those deaths, where I do understand what Ronaldo's saying. It's like, well, they keep doing this. Pretty soon it's going to be like, well, it's going to be like the comic books, we're just going to be like, oh, all right, they'll be back in a couple of movies or
Right, exactly.
now
If fans want him enough, here he comes.
right. But of course the antidote to that is to do what you suggested, where the death remains impactful, because in the case of going, say, to pre-Phantom Menace, you would be basically just covering the early career or whatever of Mace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a way of giving us more Mace Windu without necessarily screwing up the story.
Right.
So I could
like
probably...
I said, he's still young enough. Well, he still looks so much like himself that he can still play. You might have to touch up some stuff here and there, but for the most part, I mean, he looks exactly the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. With the upcoming projects, Ronaldo says, I don't see where he could fit. Maybe in the Obi-Wan show or Ahsoka. Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying toward the beginning of the show too. It's kind of like, well, from what's out now, it's like, I mean, I would almost say Ahsoka would be really the only spot that I could see him fitting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really a little bit tough to even figure out where you would put him. And again, Bryce Dallas Howard basically responded to his near plea to come back to the Star Wars universe, with a bunch of like eyeballs or something. So it's sort of like nobody's really sure what that means. I mean, and again, this could almost be a show that we do on this, but when it was basically announced that Maul was the original villain in Obi-Wan, and then they changed it with Vader, and some more stuff has come out about that, where supposedly the story group was challenging Deborah Chow and her team to think outside the box, and when they didn't want to do Maul, it was like, okay, we'll come up with something else, and somebody else was basically reminding them about the Grand Inquisitors from Rebels, and was kind of like, well, if you do Vader, you can have the Grand Inquisitor in there, and you could start doing a little bit of that, and that could be intriguing. And that's basically where it left off. So if they think outside the box and they figure out a way to bring Mace back that actually makes sense according to the stories, because again, and I can't stress this enough, you can't just look at a single show anymore, because the one comic booky thing that they are doing, which is very positive in my opinion, is that they're treating this franchise now like an actual franchise. Like every show is affecting the other ones, and you have these crossover story arcs and stuff like that, and characters are jumping in and out of each other's series, and eventually I'm sure this is going to spill over into the movies as well. So I think that's a good thing. And because of that, if you could figure out a way to bring Mace back that would actually make sense to this overall story they're trying to tell, then I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, I don't see him fitting into anything like I said current right now. Like I said, I just really don't see him coming post Return of the Jedi, because once again, if you bring him in, you're gonna have to kill him right back off again, because you don't see him in anything else. I mean, granted, you do have 30 years, so anything could have happened from that time. Let's say he came up in Book of Boba Fett or something like that, season 3. It's like, okay, well, it's still far enough in after Return of the Jedi, in between The Force Awakens, where I guess he could be doing stuff. But then once again, it kind of screws with the whole Luke thing, because like Luke is supposed to be the one rebuilding the Jedi Order, and
Yeah.
if you got Mace Windu, I mean, it just screws up a whole lot of different stories that we already know, and now you have to account for that, and that's the thing that I think people are just really aren't realizing. But like I said, I think the best place for Mace would be if they did something pre Phantom Menace, and they already kind of have a platform with that, with the High Republic Acolyte, which is supposed to take place right at the end of the High Republic era. So in between, let's say maybe the acolyte and well, still I think that's still a little bit too. I think maybe it's like
Yeah.
maybe 50 years or something before Events
I
of Phantom
mean,
Menace deals.
unless you do one of those whatever race or whatever Windu is, just because he's humanoid doesn't mean he's like Earth humans. Maybe they have a lifespan of 200 years. Who knows?
Well, I mean, it could, yeah. So I
Of
mean,
course, even then
if
he'd
you
be
played
dead,
around,
right? So,
right, or at least a significantly older,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
So yeah, I think if you put him closer to like maybe the Phantom Menace, if you said, okay, this is 30 years before the events of the Phantom Menace, okay, because then he could still be, because we don't know how old Mace is at the beginning of Phantom Menace. I mean,
No,
you could tell he's a grown man, so he's probably, you could say he's maybe like 50 or something years old, or 60 maybe. He's just spry for his age. you know I mean, you could do that, and then now you have him at 30 years old in the in the Jedi Order or something like that,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah. I mean, well, and here's something that Ronaldo says that could also be a possible thing that you could do. But if he comes back, just make him a Force ghost. Now, if you make him a Force ghost, you have a lot more options now. Because he could be appearing to Ahsoka or appearing to Luke or something like that. And you could do all that without him screwing anything up.
Only problem with that is, I mean, and that seems like a good idea, but how would he be a Force ghost, because he wasn't taught? Remember,
Well,
Yoda and Obi-Wan were the only ones to really have known
here's
how
how
to
you do
do
it.
that.
Now, I know that you're probably going to say this is reaching. And I wouldn't blame you because, call it maybe my frazzled mind from earlier. I mean, I don't know.
Trust
But
me, I understand.
but maybe what you could do is, because we have said that all that happened was, he got his hand chopped off and thrown out a window. Now, granted, for
Mhm,
most people that would do the job.
mhm.
But we know the Jedi have been jumping out of like speeders and crap like that in the skies of Coruscant for a while. This is not necessarily a new
Mhm.
technique. So
Right.
when Mace was thrown out the window,
Mhm.
it is possible that he could have somehow controlled his landing and survived that. Now, if he did, at some point, and this could have been like an off-screen kind of thing, maybe he visited Obi-Wan, maybe he, and somehow maybe he, or Yoda, and maybe he learned the technique. I mean, again, it's reaching, I admit that, but the point is, you could make that work without too much of an effort. I mean, even though, yeah, there'd be a lot of fans that'd be like, okay, really? but I mean, look, again, and this is something I said, when you were still having issues. If once they brought Maul back, everything was off the table to me. I mean, it's like you could do anything at this point by bringing him back. Because not only did they bring Maul back, but they made him a main focus of, across multiple shows.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like,
The man was
Maul
chopped
being
in
on the dark
half,
side.
thrown down a shaft. We don't know how as long his body was down there before they got him and put his little spider legs on him. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like,
And I mean, they said like the dark side of the Force like kind of sustained him or whatever, because he was like really enraged. Of course, he was really angry, and of course, we know that fuels the dark side. But so I could kind of
oh,
understand. Hmm.
oh, all right. I'm gonna skip ahead and put this up. This is Ronaldo.
Uh-oh.
Read that.
Oh. Oh.
I'm to be honest, I'm kind of mad that I didn't think of it myself.
Me too. That's the
Ronaldo,
first thing I thought. I was like, why did I
that's
think of
all
that one?
right. He was
All right,
thrown out
man.
the window. All right,
Window.
all right. That's and then of course Voyager, ever encouraging him, laughs at that.
Oh. All right. He
Oh,
gets the award for the day.
yeah, man. Wow. Oh, that's just well,
Yeah.
that basically just threw everything off for me. But you know
See that?
what? You could do it because I'm sure that Mace was pretty angry when he was thrown out. Like when he got his hand lopped off and was thrown out, I'm sure he was pretty mad. I'm sure maybe there was a little darkness there that could have sustained him as well. Because again, it wasn't like he was, mortally wounded or anything. Yeah, he wasn't stabbed. He wasn't slashed. He wasn't, he had his hand lopped off and thrown out a window. Now, again, like I said, for most of us, that would pretty much do the trick.
I mean, Luke did it.
Yeah.
Empire.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much.
There you go. That Cloud City thing was every bit as much of a dangerous drop. And you could say, look, the will of the Force basically made it, kind of found a way for him to survive. And the same thing could happen to Windu. Now, I'm just saying these are avenues by which you could bring him back if you wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, you could. But I mean, I'm just saying, like, as the Force goes, that's the only part I would have trouble with is just that, like, okay, once again, if he found Yoda or something like that, or Obi-Wan, like, you would think they would keep him around, dude. Like, okay, yeah, we can regroup now. We got me, and there are 3 powerful Force users. I mean, you got Yoda, Mace, and Obi-Wan. I mean, yeah, what he said, who needs Luke? It's you run into that same problem again.
And with the Force Ghost thing, I can let that go because it's like, well, how did Anakin do it at the end of Return of the Jedi? Wasn't like he ever learned.
Well, see, he's a son of the Force, though. Well, so, I mean, that makes sense.
All right. Voyager. Yeah, moving on. Voyager says, I find it funny that Samuel L. Jackson put his hat in the casting ring. Nicolas Cage did the same thing for the Batman sequel. Yeah, it is kind of strange about the timing of it. Although, like I said toward the beginning of the show, though, this isn't the first time that he's actually made it very known that he wants to return to the Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
This is
he did that for the sequel, didn't he? For the
sequel
trilogy.
He did. I mean, it would actually be more fair to say that this is just the latest time that he's talked about it. That's why this isn't really breaking news, but I find the timing interesting. That's all.
Well, not only that, but I think the biggest thing is the fact that you have these new directors, and I think he's just trying to appeal to that, like, it's different from when everything was on the Lucasfilm. Okay, they're rebooting the franchise, they're trying to get stuff, but it's like now it's like, okay, you got somebody like Bryce Dallas Howard was actually responding to him. That's something that we haven't seen yet. That's always been kind of kept in the back or kept in the shadows. But the fact that one of the main directors that we've kind of known in the new era of Star Wars, being Bryce Dallas Howard, actually like responded, even though it's just some eyes or whatever, it's still like,
yeah, it's a very strange. RG50 joins us actually too. Yeah, it's kind of a weird response. I found it to be very odd, actually.
Yeah, like, I mean, like, if you're gonna respond that way, see, my thing is like, okay, if there was like no hope, why even respond to anything?
Yeah.
Right. If you think like, all right, Sam, you're crazy. I'm not even about to dignify that with a response type thing. But then the fact that you did respond, and then you kind of responded with the emojis, how people are gonna take that. And how the Star Wars universe is. And is that we're looking into it, more to watch out for. I mean, like, what does this mean? It's kind of like,
right. I mean, it's very cryptic, and it just, all it's going to do is it's going to take people, and that's probably what they want, though. Although Bryce Dallas Howard doesn't strike me as a type that would do stuff like that. So
she doesn't.
Yeah, I don't.
JJ, know.
Yes. Oh goodness. Okay, so basically Ronaldo says, Mace is like Boromir from Lord of the Rings to me. He sacrificed himself trying to stop the enemy and they failed, but in an heroic way. A character like that doesn't need to come back, in my opinion. And I can see that. I mean, it's one of those things that on one hand, and this is what happens. If you create a character that's too cool, people will love that character and they'll want to see him forever. And you don't really want to get trapped in the whole storytelling thing of, well, let's only kill off the mediocre or, just
Mhm.
maybe nondescript characters, right? Sometimes the idea is you want to create a bunch of cool characters, and sometimes they just have to die. I think that was a cool trend that they started in the 2000s with TV shows, where it's kind of like, yeah, guess what? Now you're going to have main cast members who will be killed off.
Yeah.
You know, before it was always the guest stars, or like in Star Trek, it was always the red shirts because they weren't the main people. And, you know, I mean, on one hand, that's great because you get to know this group of people and they become a part of your lives in a sense. And you want to, especially with television, you want to experience that camaraderie and that community with them every week. But ultimately, if you really want to tell a really good, meaty, weighty, more realistic, I guess you could say, story, then yeah, you know, sometimes, I mean, when you think of a war going on, the odds of each of these main people surviving is pretty small, actually, especially when you have them all in the main action. I mean, if they all worked in an office somewhere, then yeah, their odds of surviving would be a lot higher. But you're talking about all these characters that are going out into the front lines and taking on all these crazy missions and stuff like that. So, you know, the odds of surviving that are going to be small. So you have to, as somebody who is viewing this and taking this in, you have to allow the creators permission to kill off these really good characters in a meaningful way that advances the story and deepens and enriches it. Because if you don't, you're basically sacrificing the story for your own comfort level.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that a lot in 24. It's one of our favorite shows.
Well, that was one of the that's one of the examples that I was thinking of actually when I was making that statement. Well, that was one of the first significant ones where you're like, oh, these top build characters actually could die. You know, and you started getting to the point where you're just like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't get too attached to this person because they may be gone. Now, but I got to say, you know, you bring up 24, but they brought Tony back. He supposedly was dead or something like that. Yeah. Wasn't it an explosion or something like that? Because I remember he came back and he was kind of like evil or whatever, and they did a thing like that. So even 24 became a victim of, okay, we love this character, bring him back. You know, and it's really got to be difficult for storytellers because on one hand, you want to say, no, we got to be true to the story. You have to let it go, people. But on the other hand, it's a story. It's not real life, you know, and that's the nice thing about stories is you can not necessarily have happy endings, but you could do things like that. Oh, this character, people really like this character. Okay, let's bring him back. Because how many times have you seen characters that either you thought were cool or were basically cool, but they just didn't catch on? You know, like Phasma. Nobody gave a crap that Phasma got killed because they underutilized her, for one thing.
Right.
But you could actually make the same argument with Phasma, that Phasma had a lot of potential.
True.
And if they had brought her back, they could have realized that potential. Instead, they jacked her in 7, they jacked her in 8, and that was it. But nobody was really up in arms about it.
Yeah, because there wasn't anything of the character to make you want to care. You know, that's one of the things with the show Power. You know, how they, you know, at the season finale of the show, you know, how they kind of showed, you know, the last main character dying. And of course, you know, everybody, because this character was always known for being a step ahead of a lot of people, you know, this, like, they always like, well, he could have planned, he could have saw this coming, and he could have done, you know, it's like everybody started speculating on what he could have done. And, you know, even the actor who played him was just like, look, you know, he's done, he's gone. And it's like, no, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's a throw off. You know, I don't think he's dead for real. I think this is, you know, and it's just like, you know, it becomes the whole like, oh, I saw Elvis or Tupac or something like that. You know, now everybody wants to, because they're so beloved. I mean, like you said, you know, so perfectly, you know, they kind of almost become a part of your life. It's like, I can't picture life without, and you take that death very personally, but that's the point. You're supposed to take it like that. And that's what gives it meaning. like kind of what Ronaldo was saying earlier, like, when you don't give it meaning, you kind of cheapen it. And that's how a lot of people felt even when Palpatine's like, okay, he's hit with a bunch of force lightning, he fell down the reactor shaft. I mean, essentially he had the same death as Mace Windu. Really think about it.
Yeah, well, and earlier during the show, basically one of the points that I made toward the beginning was that you can almost hang with that more because of him practicing the dark magic and the Sith arts and all this stuff, and he was obsessed with resurrections and cloning and all that. I mean, honestly, especially even with the expanded universe, I mean, yeah, people get a lot of crap, in case of emergency, break glass, and, let's bring back Palpatine. This whole sequel trilogy's tanking, let's get him back. And Colin Trevorrow wasn't even going to use him in his version of Episode 9. So I get that criticism. On the other hand, you can argue the merits of whether or not they should have brought him back. But if you're just talking about purely, does it make sense to bring him back? Absolutely. When you look at all of the things surrounding him, obsessed with cloning, obsessed with resurrection, like creating life, all these dark arts and Sith alchemy and all this stuff he was doing. I mean, they probably shouldn't have, but it makes sense. It makes sense in the story to do that. And it was not much of a stretch to say, oh, well, this is part of his grander plan. He was really going to do this final order. And, even with the season 3 pictures that we got, there's a lot of people that are speculating that the red Mandalorian helmets are in some way related to what would become the final order, almost like a precursor to the Sith troopers. So,
yeah, I mean, I agree, and I totally agree with you, as far as Palpatine is concerned, because there was substantial source material to support that.
Right.
But when you have somebody like Mace Windu, I mean, it's one of those things where it's just kind of like, that was the beginning of the end. And you always saw, like, Mace Windu as this powerful, strong. I mean, you look at it like, okay, he survived out of all the guys that, that he showed up with. He had like about 5 or 6 guys with him.
You're right, they were dispatched
and they were all
immediately.
Like in seconds. Yeah, and Mace Windu is still holding his own, and maybe he would have even lasted longer because of the fact that, like, all right, even though Palpatine is powerful, super powerful, and he may have eventually failed to his blade, eventually, but just the fact that Mace is like, okay, all right, you're gonna hit me with some dark side, I got some dark side for you too. So it's kind of like Palpatine was kind of like, okay, I can kind of. And that was an interesting battle because, you really want to see what that would have really looked like had Anakin not been there. Because
I'll give you if we were to ever do most underrated things in Star Wars, that would probably be my number one. That battle.
Yeah.
That was the battle that I did not know I wanted.
Exactly.
I mean, because when they did that, it was kind of like, oh, Mace versus Palpatine. I never really thought of that one because everybody wanted Yoda versus Palpatine. But then when you saw the Mace one, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, okay. And then it ends up being both from a psychological or emotional level to also just within the story. I mean, it's like one of the coolest things ever. Because, that's a really cool matchup, actually.
Exactly. And once again, in the story, it made sense. It made sense for, like, okay, Yoda's still kind of hanging back because, like, okay, he wouldn't necessarily throw himself in the fray unnecessarily. Because then people try to argue with, like, well, he showed it with Dooku, but Dooku was his Padawan, so that made sense.
Well,
but
it's something that you said a long time ago that I never thought about. I don't remember what show it was. It might not have even been on a show. I think you said it on the show, but it might have just been, when we were talking about Star Wars, right? And I never looked at it like this, but it's so true. Is that the Palpatine-Vader relationship is like the Yoda-Mace relationship. Mace is kind of like Yoda's enforcer. He's that,
Yep.
And even though Palpatine works in the shadows, Yoda doesn't. I mean, Yoda is very much, everybody's aware of who he is and how powerful he is. But Mace is still kind of like his second in command, his enforcer, the guy that's, going to go out and kick butt.
And
that's intriguing.
I mean, Yeah, and that's what made it so cool is that like he was familiar with the dark side without being all the way in. He could
Mm-hmm.
utilize things, and I could see how that would be very jarring for somebody like Palpatine, who's so used to okay fighting the Jedi, fighting, but then it's at the same time he does have to be prepared for the Sith thing because he's always prepared for his apprentice to try to take him out. So you kind of have that weird juxtaposition of like, okay, well, I could go dark, I could go light, and being able to switch in and out between the two, it would be really, really interesting to see how those two would have really battled it out had Anakin not arrived.
Right, and I agree with that. And to take it even further, I think that, one of the things that always fascinated me about that whole duel, besides the fact of what would have happened if Anakin hadn't, because like you said, his arrival was a key moment in why that battle turned.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to look at that aspect of it. But the thing about Mace just overall, though, is that, I think because he's proven to be an interesting character, people wanted to see more of him in much the same way as Maul.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the reason why you're getting this, is because it's almost how we felt about, and I think I brought this up at the beginning of the show too, it's almost how we thought about Maul at the end of Phantom Menace. It's like, okay, you create this super cool character and kill him off right away.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, man, I wish we could have just gotten more, more information, more stories with him, basically. And I think that that's how we kind of feel about Mace. Like, well, yes, he was in all 3 movies, but it wasn't like he was doing much. He was sitting on the council up until the end of Attack of the Clones. That's when we get a little bit of a taste of it. And then, of course, Revenge of the Sith. And I think it would just be interesting to see a little bit of that. And it would be kind of cool in a way to see Mace interacting with some of the characters, more in after episode 3, let's say. And so therefore, if they could find a way to do it, it would be cool, because that's the downside of creating a compelling character, as we've been talking about, is that you run the risk of people getting too attached to them. Now, of course,
right.
Before Ronaldo has a chance to say it. Yeah, the Jedi frown upon attachments. Speaking of the chats, I should let me start getting to this. Now this one's not really sure. So Voyager says, Daryl and Eric, can you do a Q&A about the show pod towards the end? So I'm not exactly sure.
I think he wants to just do a question and answer at the end of the show.
I mean, I guess.
About the show.
I mean, I guess.
Any other questions or answers, but that's kind of what the whole show is.
That's what the whole show is. I mean, you can do that at any time.
Now.
Yeah,
you got a question, just fire away.
Yeah, because in fact, some of the best episodes that we've had, it's just been going, it's been like a free-for-all. And I should probably mention this more often at the beginning of our shows or periodically throughout the show, is that we have these topics that we come to on Mondays, on Fridays, but we're not strictly just talking about that. I mean, Ronaldo can tell you that we've gone in like crazy directions to where we've gotten so far off of whatever the topic is, it doesn't matter. Because
sometimes we're not even talking about Star Wars. We're talking about Superman and
Batman, right. Yeah, I mean,
Cobra Kai.
What was the last thing? Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, basically, this is a bunch of people, Star Wars fans, hanging out on a Friday night and a Monday night, just talking Star Wars. And I mean, if there's some, question or whatever that pops in your head that may not be like absolutely on topic, we've gone into, because sometimes the topics have actually led into stuff. Like, we're talking about the topic, but then we'll veer off on maybe something about the Force or something about a specific character. And then that just snowballs into this whole giant discussion. And, because on one hand, I mean, I get it. Because on a lot of YouTubers, if you sit there and watch like all these YouTube shows on, how to have a successful channel and all that stuff. Well, yes, the first thing that they'll tell you, first of all, is niche down, right? And then the second thing that they'll tell you usually is, have your topic, kind of stay on it, because the people that are clicking on it, that's what they're coming here specifically to see. Well, guess what? Even though we do try to follow some of these guidelines, because we do want to increase the popularity of the show, and we would love to have more subscribers, that said, I still will not, and neither one of us really, will ever sacrifice what the show was created to do. If that means having a more selective audience, then all right. But the whole idea is that we're just basically a discussion-based show on Star Wars. So if you got, it's kind of like, instead of, waiting until we're done talking about the topic and then we do this big Q&A or something, you don't have to do that. You just throw it out there now. It's totally fine. Ronaldo goes on to say, also, if the character is a Jedi, sometimes death isn't that meaningful in Star Wars. We know we'll probably see him or her as a Force ghost. That's cynical.
Yeah.
Not untrue, though. Not untrue.
Right.
I mean, I should point that out. I mean, and you know what? Unfortunately, the franchise is somewhat, the way they've been running it, at least under Disney, it's kind of made us jaded that way, right? Where it's kind of like, yeah, they're going to die. All right, I wonder what future series they're going to turn up in. Or they're going to cheese out and do the Force Ghost thing,
Right.
I mean, it's tough to say. But I mean, just before I forget it too, just to go back to this other point, when we were talking about the whole, Palpatine thing, and something that you had said with that Palpatine Mace duel was that Palpatine always had to be prepared because he knew his apprentices or whatever were going to eventually try to kill him. That's actually dealt with very heavily in the comics right now, because he's been testing Vader, trying to, smoke him out, do all this stuff. And of course, Vader's actually tried to kill him on several occasions. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's actually a very current topic right now that's delving into how Palpatine handles it. And one of the other things that it does, which to me is infinitely cool, is that it really shows you truly how powerful Palpatine is. I mean, as powerful as you see him in the films and maybe in a couple of novels, when you really start to take in everything in totality, the comics and stuff like that especially, you really see how powerful he is.
I always just thought that was I think that's such a cool thing that the Sith have going on, just in general. But it's also weird, because it's like, essentially, and this is what I kind of equate it to. Essentially, it's kind of like a guy proposing to a girl and she rejects him and they still date. Like, it's kind of like, okay, like, you got this apprentice and it's like, all right, he tries to kill you. He loses. And then it's like, all right, we'll see you back to work at 8. Like, what? Like,
Well,
how do you go back to that?
Because you have to
and still
remember,
be like, oh, hey, my master, how you doing?
That's part of what makes you the Sith, right? Because it's sort of an incestuous. Yeah, it's kind of like it is. It's like an implosion almost, because the final test is, once you kill your master, that's when you're worthy to be a master. And, Palpatine had even explained it in a comic book once. Because one of the things I love about the comics, too, which is actually surprising, is that they essentially, they actually go beyond, some of the normal conversations, and they explain a lot of these things. And one of the things that Palpatine was basically explaining to Vader was like, listen, in order for you to really be truly, well, I guess, to arrive finally, right? To be the Sith that you're supposed to be, you have to be able to kill me. And if you can kill me, then I'm no longer worthy to be the master. See, so it's kind of that thing. It's sort of like, well, but I don't know if I want to do that because of whatever. See, it's the Sith look at it like, well, if you can kill me, that's fine, because basically your whole life is about amassing and keeping power, right? And so if you're able to be defeated, then you really aren't worthy to be a master, and you're not even worthy to live at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and honestly, that's in a lot of different cultures in the sense of.
Well, sure. I mean, it's some
it's a lot in
bizarro
the
circle
progression
of life, you know. It's
well, and it's kind of like that, but just only to a certain degree, and I think that's what
right.
makes it weird, is because, like, all right, if you can defeat, like, I'll just take like a martial art or something like that. Like, all right, if you could defeat your master, then it's like, okay, you've earned the right to wear these stripes because you are on the same level, or you even bested even me. So now you deserve this position here. But I think it's just beat, not kill. So I mean, and I know it's just like it's taking it to that next level. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's kind of weird because now coming back like the next day, like, okay, it's not like they're going to give you pointers really and tips on how to kill them either. It's like,
Yeah, I know.
you know what I'm saying? It's just it's weird. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's cool,
Well,
but
but
it's weird at the
that's
same
part of it
time.
too, and it's so ironic that you bring this up, because the comics have been dealing really heavily with this, right? Because Vader's had a Palpatine sent him on a quest. It's kind of like you have to figure out how to do this.
Mhm.
Like, one of them, there's some ancient Sith spirit or something that Vader had to confront or whatever, and then of course there was a Sith assassin that Palpatine sent after him that he had to defeat, and it's almost like, it's weird because it literally is like that, two people trying to kill each other and like, all right, see you tomorrow at 8, that kind of thing. Because he comes back and, he's like, okay, well, have you learned? Yeah, I've learned. And, it's kind of, it's a really bizarro thing, but it's actually a very cool story that they've actually come
Yeah.
up with. That's because it's kind of like you had said, this is one of the reasons why both of us have been looking forward to the Acolyte so much, because
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yep.
yeah, you don't see that on the Sith side, right?
And I'm finally glad that they're starting to tackle that. And see, I think that's where a lot of good directors can come out of that, because you can create, especially on the Sith side, you can create some freaky, crazy, out of the box stuff, because it is the Sith. Because not just the dark side of the Force, but you got magic and alchemy and all this type of other stuff that's coming out of this. It's so many different levels over there in the Sith. Whereas like the Jedi are kind of, I don't want to say one dimensional, but they're kind of just in their one lane, and they're just kind of just ride that, so to speak. But the Sith are kind of like all over the place on all these nook and crannies and stuff. But yeah, it's totally like watching Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Sith
Yes.
edition. And that's just basically like, hey,
Mr.
honey,
and
how was
Mrs.
work
Sith.
today? Oh,
So, hey,
all right,
man, Ronaldo got me started. I'm
I
just
know.
telling you that right now, right out the gate. And you put it out there. I mean,
Yeah, I know. So, yeah, I just think that, it would be cool. Like I said, once again, just kind of getting back, but I think it would be cool to see Mace. I would love to see him again. He literally is one of my favorite characters. And I would love to see more of him, but I would rather see him in a space where he deserves to be in. And I just really don't see him fitting into anything post Return of the Jedi.
well, and Ronaldo basically, reminds us that, look, we heard him in episode 9, along with the other Jedi, and that's one of the, I guess you could say, that opens the door in a sense, possibly to do it. I don't know if that's necessarily, that's the best way to bring him out. Well, we did hear his disembodied voice in this, crazy sequel, so that means we're gonna, shove him in like Andor or something. I mean, again, they do have to be cognizant of where they put him in, because here's the thing, and this goes into what you were just saying when you were talking about how, yes, they can come up with all this cool Sith stuff and different training, and they can do stuff. But here's the thing that I would, if I had the chance to talk to any future Star Wars creators, one of the things that I would say is like, listen, you want to be creative, you want to be original, you want to do all these things, and then of course you also want to honor what's come in the past, and you want to stay within the boundaries, and pretty much an impossible task. But here's the thing that you have to keep in mind no matter what you do. Be careful what you introduce in this universe, because it's not like other franchises or other shows where you can introduce something and then just kind of throw it away, because once you introduce something, it becomes canon that now other storytellers are going to be bound to keep going. You know, and that's something that I think a lot of a lot of these guys don't think about. They'll start coming up with all this crazy stuff, not realizing that, well, crap, you just put this in the Star Wars universe, so now it's there. And sometimes Lucas has been guilty of that. I mean, the midi-chlorian thing is the thing that jumps out. It's kind of like, no, dude, you got to be a little bit more careful now. You can't just throw this old thing around and just be all like, oh, well, because now everybody's bound to it. Now they've found a way to sidestep it in a way. And in a way, they've even made it, thank goodness you have people like Filoni and Favreau, because they basically took the midi-chlorian thing and incorporated it in such a way that it's not the be-all, end-all of the Force, like what Lucas was trying to say it was, where he took it from fantasy to sci-fi. They still were able to implement this little sci-fi-ish thing, but still maintain a very fantasy element to it.
Right.
You know? And then, of course, they don't call it midi-chlorian. What they call it, the M count or something. It's like, yeah, way to disguise it, guys. That's really good.
Superman with his glasses.
Right. Okay, so Voyager apparently clarifying the Q&A thing is like, how did you decide to start the show and how did you two meet? Well,
you got to go way back to episode 000.
Exactly. You read my mind. So we'll give you the Cliff's Note version, but sitting here on YouTube, before we put this stuff on video, we started out with an audio podcast that is actually on this channel. If you go back, because I think I gave up the episode numbers a while back, but it would have been episode 00, but it was basically called A Long Time Ago. So if you go back, you'll start to see thumbnails where they're kind of like black and white and stuff like that. If you go keep advancing back to like the last video or whatever.
We call it our legends. Us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But basically, the whole show, this whole audio podcast that is here on YouTube, goes into the entire story of why we started the show, who we are, how we met, the whole shot. Because one of the things that was crazy about when we started the show was the fact that even when we were coming out with this audio podcast, the first thing that people are going to look at is like, well, who are these guys, number one? Why should I listen to them? You see the tagline, 2 fans, 2 generations, all things Star Wars. Because essentially, at the time, well, yeah, you weren't even working with me yet. You were still a student in high school. You'd taken the video class that I happened to be. There was a teacher that was teaching it, but I was kind of running the TV studio operations, and I would teach the students how to do video production. And Daryl took the class, and he would come down with his other people or whatever, and do the assignments and everything. And then I don't know. I don't even remember how we got on the subject of Star Wars. I don't know if maybe I mentioned it and you locked onto it, or maybe you mentioned it and I locked onto it, but it's funny how that works.
I think I brought it up.
You may have, yeah.
We were talking about like TV shows and movies or something down one particular day. I remember where we were. I remember you were sitting at the computer, and I remember you were working on something. She was like, "Yeah, you were seeing Star Wars," and you're like, "Oh, I've seen it." And then like it just
it sounds like how I would respond too.
Yeah, it's like these kids.
It's like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know. So
I am Star Wars. Get into one of those like things, but yeah,
he's been quietly. Erica is Palpatine. I am all the Jedi, but
yeah, right. I am all the fans. That's awesome.
But no, that's kind of how we started. He and I, like Eric said, I was a student of his. Then as we continued to work together as I was going through the progressive grades. He and I just got closer, and eventually just became friends, and then became like really close friends. And then, we would always chat about Star Wars and stuff because for me, I came up doing I guess you want to talk about as far as movie releases. I'm from the prequel era, in the sense of those movies coming to the theaters. But I started watching that. I think I got the VHS tape for like my 8th birthday or something, and my uncle got it for me, and I had no idea even really what Star Wars was. Heard of it, but he got me the whole box set, and then I started watching him, and then it became instantly like my favorite, set of movies to watch, and I would watch them all the time, and it's actually what led me into production. So when I met Eric, like I was kind of telling him, like, yeah, this is kind of the thing that, led me down into this path, really, so to speak. And then Eric, he comes from the generation where he was there when it actually was released. So that's where the whole 2 generations come from.
Right.
But
yep, I was there like right from the beginning, 1977, 6 years old. Saw it in the theater for the first time, instantly hooked. And it went like that with you. And then what happened was our conversations about Star Wars got deeper and deeper to the point where we were talking in depth about characters and things like that. And it was like the way we approached the fandom was very similar. Like we weren't super geeky about it to where, there's some like out of focus character in the back of some scene and these guys know everything about them and all that stuff. I mean, I admit when I was younger, it's not so much an age thing as it is how much stuff is out there, right? Because for a while, all you had was the original trilogy, and then you started getting some expanded universe books, but it was still easy to keep track of everybody. Now, it's just like you have all these books, you have all the source material, comics and stuff, and, trying to keep a lot of the characters straight and, like all these Sith Lords that nobody's ever really heard of, except, it's almost like our fandom, and a lot of it was also the more philosophical parts of Star Wars, like how characters were affecting the world around them and things like that. It was just kind of like a very similar vibe, and pretty much people would hear us talk about Star Wars, and they'd just be like, yeah, you guys should have your own show or something, because, I mean, they would just watch us talk about it. And they were fascinated. They couldn't really participate in the conversation because they didn't know enough about it, but it was almost like they were entertained just listening to us talk about this thing that we love. And so we were like, well, podcasting was starting to come in. And we're like, well, maybe we should take this on the road, so to speak. It's kind of like, I mean, if people are kind of digging it, maybe we should just talk about Star Wars in a podcast. And then, of course, started going, well, we want to put it on YouTube. But, so for a while, like I said, if you go back to that very first episode called A Long Time Ago, and then I think the second episode, we reviewed The Last Jedi. And then, on and on it went. And so for those episodes, we just basically had like like our thumbnail was our video, and then you would hear the audio underneath. And after a while, we were kind of like, well, this is kind of boring. Let's just set up a camera on a wide shot, like some podcasters will do. And then being in production, it just kind of grew from there. Well, let's have a couple of cameras. Well, let's have 3 cameras and have somebody switch for us and lower thirds and all kinds of stuff, right? And then that got to be crazy. And then I started getting into live streaming for my job. And then I started going, hey, what would be cool is if we could talk to people like you guys in real time and have you chat back. Because I was a big both of us were John Campea fans. Used to watch the Jedi Council. And in fact, Jedi Council on Collider is kind of what we modeled this after.
Yep.
Just modified it for our own thing. And so from there, we just, started doing the live stream. And we used to do like 3 topics per show and all that. But then it was kind of like we almost had to move on too fast. And like I said, this is basically a big discussion show, so we can talk about, any Star Wars thing. It's not like we have to sit there and stay on topic. Stay on topic. You could basically just, if there's some other Star Wars thing that pops in there, yeah, by all means, man, let's talk about it. Because like I said, it's basically this whole show we pretty much created because we love talking about Star Wars a lot, but sometimes, work and stuff like that would get in the way. So the other thing that this show did was it allowed us a forum for just Daryl and I, at least, to just sit down and, let's have fun on a Friday night, kind of kick back and talk some Star Wars. And then we started thinking if we live stream it, we can have other people join us and maybe build an entire community. It'd be wonderful if we had, hundreds of people chatting in. It's just this big, giant community kicking back and, enjoying a Friday night and Monday nights. It's kind of like, okay, you're getting into the week. It kind of sucks. You got to go back to work after a weekend. It's like, well, you know what? We'll soften that blow too. Come spend an hour or two with us on a Monday night. Of course, I know for football season, it kind of hurts. Daryl's really showing his dedication when he does that, right? But, that's basically how it goes. And that's pretty much how we met. And that's how, we started the show. And like I said, I mean, I don't know, that first show must have been like an hour and a half, 2 hours just on that. Like we go into really big detail. So if you or anybody watching this right now is really interested on how this whole thing began, I would encourage that. And in fact, sometimes we'll bring up things like The Last Jedi or, some other things. I mean, if you go back into our early shows, especially when we were just an audio podcast, I mean, you could actually, okay, here's what we thought about it right when it came out. I mean, we always joke about actually how many times we probably flip-flop. Like if we actually went back and watched, say, like our Last Jedi review, maybe we would disagree with it. Because I mean, time, sometimes time will basically, it kind of reshapes, Maybe you look back on it, because if you think about it, I'll still never forget it. I remember we said this during our review. For the first time ever, after watching a Star Wars movie, we didn't say a word to each other for like half the ride back. And it's kind of like, it was crazy. Okay, so now Ronaldo has a question, and he says, well, I have a question. That's how I knew he had a question, by the way. Nothing gets by me. This is just a rumor, but do you think there is a realistic possibility that this actually happens?
About us doing the podcast? Absolutely.
Absolutely. No, well, before you do that, he says, he's talking about the Mace Windu thing. He says he gives it a 10% out of 100%. Dang, dude. So it's not happening.
Get that out. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't think it's, okay, well, let me ask you this question, Ronaldo. Are you saying it won't happen ever? Or are you talking about it won't happen like right now? Like for this whole post Return of the Jedi thing?
Ooh, a good distinction. Because that is a really good...
Yeah. Because you kind of have to think about that, because it's like, we're talking about like post Return, because that's where this question originally derived from, was from that he wanted to come back in this era, so to speak.
Yeah, but I mean, given the fact, though, that they are making Obi-Wan and stuff like that, I mean, do you think it's conceivable that he might be taking all that into consideration? Or do you think he's just focused on your Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, soon to be Mace Windu?
Well, I think that's what what he's saying is, honestly, well, in my mind, for Samuel Jackson, I think what he's talking about, he's looking at how these different characters are getting their own shows and getting their own things. And so maybe he'll be interested in doing like a Mace Windu show, which would be cool. But once again, because like you see Boba Fett, he's got his own show. You got the Mandalorian, Obi-Wan's got his own show. Even this little crazy band of characters, the Bad Batch. I mean, everybody's kind of Andor. Cassian Andor's got his, and that's what I'm saying. Like Mace Windu is definitely way more popular than Cassian Andor, but Cassian's getting his own show.
Well, he's probably looking at that too.
Getting his own show, so he's probably thinking like, okay, can I get a show? I wouldn't mind coming back and doing.
Well, I mean, here's the thing.
Especially since fans have been craving for it.
Absolutely, you got to look at it like this. It's like, okay, look, I got cut, fell off window, big deal. Boba Fett gets his own show. He fell down the Sarlacc pit. Ahsoka left the Jedi Order. She gets her own show. Andor
Cassian
dies
Andor-
at the end of Rogue One. He's
Death
there for like
One.
10 minutes. He gets his own show. Obi-Wan was killed at the end of A New Hope. He gets his own show. So, you know. Oh, by the way, Voyager says, I like a good origin story. Thanks for answering that.
Oh, no problem.
Yes, you are quite welcome.
And we still wrap that up faster than they do Batman, but that's besides the point.
That's right.
Moving
Moving on, Ronaldo says, you know what? Even
Yep.
non-Jedi characters can come back. Han came back out of Kylo's schizophrenia. Yeah,
Oh.
well, that was it. I mean, it's funny
That's
because,
hilarious.
you know, I always jokingly call it Force Ghost Han. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, you're even making like Force Ghosts out of non-Jedi now. And it's true, you know, it's just kind of like whatever. But again, I didn't have a problem with that because, now, I will say this. I thought it probably would have been more appropriate, even in universe, if that had been Luke. Because I think that you could have still, even though I get the emotional connection and they were trying to reverse the thing where, you know, once again, Kylo saying, I don't know if I have the strength to do it. Will you? You know, they were trying to like spin the words instead of in The Force Awakens where he's really talking about his turn to the dark side and making it complete. And Han's thinking, oh, you mean thinking of giving all this stuff up? Well, of course, in Rise of Skywalker, it's the reverse. Now he's confronting his father, but this time he's saying those lines in the tone that his father would have wanted him to. But if you really stop and think about the whole Luke Skywalker thing and how his relationship broke down with him, you know, I mean, I think it's that meme that I sent you like last
Yeah,
week
it
or
was
something
hilarious.
was hilarious. Where basically it's kind of like, you know, Anakin slaughtering children, kills like millions, maybe billions of people, and of course, you know, Luke is all like, "There's good in him. I can feel it." You know, Kylo basically has a bad dream about the dark side, and then Luke's standing over him with the lightsaber. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of a relationship issue there. And so I think it would have been cool because, first of all, Luke is a Force ghost at this point. I think it would have been kind of cool, especially when you know that he's going to appear to Rey a little bit later and kind of help her through her thing. I think it would have been a nice thing for Luke to help Kylo through his. And I think that would have made a little bit more sense, but yeah, whatever. Okay, Ronaldo says, I always wondered, if both Sith master and apprentice end up killing each other in battle, does that mean the Sith become extinct? Wow,
Yeah.
it's like one of those,
Actually, yes.
well, it depends.
But what?
I know you're probably wondering,
ahead.
like, really, dude? Can't wait to hear
I mean,
this.
go no. By all means.
Well, I mean, from the standpoint of those two, yes, but we don't really know how many are hiding in the shadows, though. And not to mention the fact that you could always, because look at the case of Asajj Ventress. So let's just say that Dooku and Palpatine killed each other. Well, Asajj Ventress was still around. She could have picked up the mantle of the Sith. Now, you know, I don't know if you necessarily have to be officially knighted or something, but, you know, you could... I don't think that there's, even though there's only two, they may not be the only two that are actually running around. Because, oh, it's the comics just had a recent example of this, actually. I'm trying to remember what it was, though. But it was sort of like you had two sets of master and apprentices running around. Of course, they weren't aware of each other. I don't know, I have to look that one up. Oh, Ronaldo. Here we go.
He set us up again.
Yeah, if Mace Windu comes back, I wouldn't like it, but I'll be open-minded about it. That's the spirit.
Yes. Keep an open window about it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. You have to, you know, I mean, you know what, I was going to try to make some bad puns, but I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let it go. But, I mean, again, I think that that's something that would actually be a good thing for all Star Wars fans to do. I mean, there's a lot of things, because if you think about it, the good thing about them expanding the franchise and the longer that it's been around and everything is that it becomes wider. And I'm talking about the fan base now. I'm not talking about just the franchise. Fan base becomes wider. There's more people that actually feel ownership, and it's kind of nice. But, and I've said this a million times over the last couple of years, that what people aren't looking at, because everybody's like, well, why is there so much toxicity in the Star Wars fandom? I mean, did The Last Jedi really suck that bad? And no, but what it is that you have now multiple generations of fans that all want different things from Star Wars. You know, now that the people in my age group, and even Daryl's age group, you know, it's okay, I was around in the very beginning. You were around pretty much at the prequels. But, you know, comparatively speaking, that's still early 90s. You know, I mean, the prequels came around late, but still.
Yeah, I mean, that's for me, my era, because, you know, you saw it, like I said, in 77, 6 years old. I'm seeing it at 8 years old, like in the probably early 90s.
Yep.
So I'm still watching the original content, and then as new content has been created, once the prequel started coming out, you know, it was like, okay, cool. But now, then it was like, okay, the prequels happened, and the last one was what, 05?
Yeah.
Revenge of the Sith came out in 05. Well, there was a whole big gap, like between 05. There was like nothing, really. I mean, you got like little stuff like,
that's not necessarily true. Yeah, you got the Clone Wars and stuff like that.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, you had that, but I'm just talking about film-wise. Like, you had.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you didn't have anything until 2012, right?
Yeah, so that was a huge
15,
big gap.
actually.
So now a lot of the kids were now starting to catch up to, like, okay, now Force Awakens is kind of like their new hope, basically. You know what I mean? And so that's a new hope for them. But for us, it's kind of like, oh, we've seen this before.
Well, that's the criticism.
And that's where
it was a new hope for us too. Like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
but the point though that I was making is the fact that, see, now that, you know, we're older, right? We're wanting more. We want Star Wars to grow up with us.
Right.
And the problem is that you still have the younger kids who, you know, were at the age that we were when we got into it. And Lucas did always say, look, this is basically a children's story. This is you know, I mean, it's a fantasy and everything, but it's ultimately for kids. And everybody's like, well, no, it's not, or whatever. It's like, oh, yeah, how old were you when you first got into it? Well, I was 7. Well, there you go. You know, it's just because you loved it and you keep coming back to it. And because of the timeless nature, as you get older, you can rewatch, you know, the episodes. And because you're in a different perspective in life, you can get something new out of it. And that's what creates the rewatchability.
Right.
But ultimately, it's still a kid show. But now, you know, you get all these people because they're, you know, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old going, well, you know, now I want an R-rated Star Wars film. And now I want, you know, all these heavy. And what's cool about that is you can keep the films basically pure in Lucas's vision. But now you can, with this Disney Plus thing, you can make a darker Star Wars film or Star Wars show. Well, film too, if you wanted to. Actually,
like you said, original movies that they're trying to create for
absolutely. That'd be great. Voyager, I want to jump ahead to his because it relates to what we were just talking about. He says, which of the 9 episodes have you rewatched the most amount of times?
I already know what your answer is going to be.
Well, I mean, you know, I haven't really kept accurate count, but I guess if I had to say offhand, probably Empire.
Empire. Mm-hmm.
It has to be either Empire or Return of the Jedi. It's got to be one of those two. I mean, offhand, I would probably say Empire, but I don't know, because I've watched Return of the Jedi a lot, too. You know, because... But...
You even got the shirt on today. See? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's more of a play on...
I know.
But yes. Point taken. I don't know if you had to guess. I mean, I don't know. You could even say
Or
Revenge of the Sith, though.
no, I mean for
Watched
me it
that
would
a
be
bunch.
Empire. I
Yeah,
mean, I would say Empire for me. I mean, it eventually became, ironically, like I hated Empire growing up. Like that was like my least favorite film out of all of them. Growing up as a kid, my favorite one was Return of the Jedi.
yeah, it makes sense.
But as
Usually,
I
if
got
people
older,
weren't, it's one of those two for most people.
well, the only thing about Empire, I mean, because it was so dark, even for me as a kid, I was kind of like creeped out by some things,
Hmm.
in Empire. Whereas Return of the Jedi was a little bit more, it kind of had some dark moments like Empire, like especially towards the end. But then they
Hmm.
also had like, the bright, fun kind of stuff like you got in New Hope at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yep.
So it kind of gave me like the best of both worlds there. But honestly, I would say Empire probably still, I've made up for that. So Empire is like my favorite Star Wars
Oh
movie of
yeah,
all time so
Empire is
far.
definitely my favorite. I mean that. See, if it's a favorite, then Empire hands down. But if you're talking about which one have I rewatched the most, that being the question. That's where it's kind of like, well, I mean, probably, but I don't know. Because
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Em- yeah, Empire is still my, the one I watched the least. I mean, Empire is the one I've watched the most, and it's my favorite.
I mean,
That's why I keep watching it.
I would, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I would probably, just by virtue of the fact it's been around since 1980, I mean, I'm sure, that's the case, but I just don't, I can't give an accurate count. I mean, I've watched all the episodes so many times.
Yeah, but that's a good
No,
question though.
it
What are
is a
you
good
guys'
question.
favorite? Like, I mean, like which one have you guys rewatched the most?
Yeah, well, they're answering it. I'll get to that in a sec. Let me get this one. I think it will never happen, but I have to leave the door open. If it happens, it will be in the post episode 6 timeline. We're going back to the Mace Windu thing.
Hmm.
Then Ronaldo says, I can imagine Luke trying to get advice from Windu. Yeah, I could see that. It would have to be shoehorned in a little bit though, but I could see it. Then he goes on to say, for me, it's episode 3. Now we're talking about what have we watched. I don't think it's the best one. It's not my favorite, but I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I was a target audience when it came out, and I was good. I mean, that's a good point because
Hmm.
I was gonna say, man. I mean, even though Empire is my favorite, which Ronaldo says too, by the way, his favorite is Empire as well. I watched episode 3 a lot because there's a lot of really cool stuff in it. It's not the best. It's the
Hmm.
best of the prequel films, I think, hands down.
Oh, definitely.
And I don't think there's really too many people that would argue that. But
Mm-mm.
even in light of the fact that, okay, it's not the best of the Star Wars films, I think it actually has the most impact because,
Rewatchability.
huh?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I was just saying
well, sure,
rewatchability.
because if you think about it, you have that dynamic between Palpatine is finally revealing more to Anakin and kind of giving him hints like, "Hey, man, it's kind of happening right under your nose." I mean, they're all thinking like, "Oh, maybe the dark side's clouding this thing," and Palpatine's over there, the dark side of the Force. I keep screwing that. What is the quote? The dark side of the Force leads
Hmm.
power.
Leads to powers and abilities some to believe to be unnatural.
That's it. It's kind of like, dude, the guy's kind of giving you hints about where he's coming from here. I mean, my favorite thing too is when Anakin's like, "Well, how do you know all this stuff?" It's like, okay, man, really? Start thinking back too that, hey, this guy was around when a lot of these weird things were happening. I'm just saying there were hints.
Well, yeah. Well, I think. See, honestly, I think for me, and I'm sure this was for a lot of people, including you, probably Eric, but like for me, I really wanted to see, like, Revenge of the Sith was the big thing for me because I really wanted to see how he became the Vader we all knew. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? And I think that's what made Revenge of the Sith so popular too, is just because, and the thing is, like, it had the most drama. I mean, you really think about it, you really see the tearing of the friendship and brotherhood of Anakin and Obi-Wan.
That was another big moment too, yeah.
Yeah, and then I mean, granted, lightsaber duels, of course, galore. You got Mace and the Palpatine, you got Yoda and Palpatine, you got, Obi-Wan and Anakin. I mean, it's I mean, if you want the action, it's there. Even from the get-go, like from the first opening scene, they are in this gigantic, huge space battle. I mean, it's really, really cool. But I think like the weight, you felt the weight of everything. The drama between Anakin and Padme. And see, I think honestly, if we would have got some of those Clone Wars stories as episode 2.
Yeah.
Like,
And episode 2 should have been episode 1.
Yeah.
I didn't need to see Anakin as a little kid. Just didn't. You could have started me at episode 2 and then given me one of the Clone Wars stories as episode 2. And then episode 3 could be what it is. Maybe give me a little bit of Vader in the suit, doing some Order 66 stuff. That's really what I would have preferred. So Voyager weighs in and says, I rewatched episode 2 the most.
Wow.
Well, the white pants. I'm right there with you, though, buddy. I might have paused episode 2 the most. I was also the target demo for the prequels. But Return of the Jedi is my favorite. It's funny because, like I said, I really think episode 2 should have been episode 1. And then maybe one of the Clone Wars stories could have been episode 2. And then, of course, you go into episode 3. Because one of the other things I thought that was really compelling about 3 was I think that they did a great job in the sense that you really feel the fall of the Jedi in that movie. Like, you could see it's unraveling. And it's got that weight, like you said, because the Jedi are starting to realize, like, hey, man, this is all coming apart. And everything just seems so empty, at the Jedi Temple and stuff like that. And then you have Mace and them going to confront Palpatine. And you just know this is the last stand. And you realize that the entire fate of the Jedi is in this moment. And they did just such a wonderful job at showing us how this is truly the beginning of the end. The Jedi are unraveling, and as an audience member, you feel helpless to stop any of it, which is how the characters are feeling. You see that Padme and Anakin are at odds, and they love each other, but they're driven by their own desires to actually be with each other, but it's actually what's undoing their relationship. And then, like you said, Obi-Wan and Anakin's thing, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I kind of look at, Revenge of the Sith the same way I look at these 2 other films. I look at it the same way as the Titanic and Passion of the Christ.
Yeah. Perfect examples.
It's like you know what's has to happen.
Yep.
And you know it's going to happen, but you hate to see it anyway.
And yet you're right there along with the characters, like powerless to stop it. Exactly. And you're watching it happen. And you're just kind of like, And that's what's so great about Revenge of the Sith. Plus, like you said, I mean, it does have a lot of spectacular action. And it also has some levity and, some light moments too. And it was just a really well done, film. And it's almost too bad that the other movies weren't done as well as Revenge of the Sith was. I think people would be a lot lighter on the prequels if that had been the case. But, I guess you can't have everything. Not everything can be. And that's what, the Bad Batch actually has a little bit of that feeling as well, which I love. Which now it turns out we're not going to see that till like 2023 now or something I've been hearing.
Yeah.
Why?
They've been shifting some stuff around. It's a whole lot of stuff that's coming on, and we might have to do a show on that just because there's a lot of different shifts and changes that's been going on in Lucasfilm.
Right. So now would actually be a good time to ask, since I'm sure, coming up on speaking of beginning of the end. This is probably the beginning of the end of our show right now. What are we talking about Monday? Do we know?
No, we don't have a topic for Monday yet. Not
No, I
confirmed.
mean,
We have plenty of stuff to talk about.
yeah, we could. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. And hey, if you guys, in the chat right now, if you got some ideas of what you'd like to see us talk about Monday, you've got probably a good 30 seconds to a minute to let us know. We'll certainly add that in because hey, it's another thing that the YouTube channel gurus always say, right? Like, hey, listen to your audience. What do they want? So we're standing by and ready. So you can let us know. Because, like you said, man, I mean, there's just so much going on right now in Star Wars. And I wish it was all good. Sometimes I wonder because, at first it seemed like, hey, these guys are back on track. They got kind of a direction going. They're connecting the threads of all areas and aspects of the franchise. And you got the High Republic going now. And
we actually have a release date. We could talk about the release date of Andor Monday.
Yeah, that's true. We could do that. Well, and Andor, there was another thing, too, that popped up about Andor, I thought, as well. I know there was a release date thing, I mean, there's like, well, I just sent you today how Christopher Lloyd's now part of the Mandalorian cast for season 3. I mean, that's crazy.
Right.
I mean, it's like when, well, it's not the Razor Crest. Did he actually name that Naboo starfighter yet?
No.
It'd be great, though, if, 88 miles per hour. I mean, that would be... I mean, it's, the references are there. But it's going to be really interesting to see what he actually, what he's bringing to it. And, I mean, I suppose maybe we could save that, too, like, for when maybe they start to reveal some more cast members in season 3, and we could do kind of like what we did with Obi-Wan, actually. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So, you still have like maybe 20, 25 seconds at this point to leave it in the chat. Or, of course, you can always leave it in the comments. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button. Definitely hit that like button because it really helps the channel. I mean, look, every YouTuber on the planet right now is telling you how it helps the channel because it does. And it helps with the YouTube algorithm and it helps put us in front of more people so maybe they can start joining us for everything. And then, of course, you're also going to want to hit the notification bell because that way you know when we're going to be on. But as all of you regular viewers know, we're on every Monday night, every Friday night at 8. And, of course, that's when we love to hang out and talk Star Wars with you guys. So, we're not really sure what we're going to talk about Monday at this point, but leave in the comments section. If you didn't get it into the chats, that's cool. Leave in the comments section if there's anything specific that is on you guys' mind that you think would make a great discussion. Either way, there's a lot going on. We'll come up with something. So with that, we will see you guys Monday night at 8. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
Thank goodness you're Daryl Sanders because, let me tell you, I was cringing at the thought of having to do... I'm so happy to hear you say the line, I'm Daryl Sanders tonight. Now, let's see. Where was I? Oh, yes. May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.